Okay, this is Dr. Abraham Weizfeld here. I'm a graduate of the University of Quebec à Montréal in Political Science Department, and I want to introduce you to two speakers, one representing the Palestine struggle for liberation from the Zionist state, and Steve Struggle, Black Panther of the United States struggle for the Black nation's liberation from white supremacism. This is unprecedented. I think that we've never had, in effect, a conference of this nature, and I think that the viewers should appreciate, the significance of this meeting here, because we're now talking about international struggles, inter-national, between the various nations. We are struggling together in solidarity against white supremacism, which is essentially what Zionism is, and the United States of America, which is an unofficial state hoisted on the genocide of the First Nations, who only comprise 2.5% of the population now. So we're dealing with, very difficult struggles, and struggles which we know for which we will succeed, because one, it is logical, and two, we have the solidarity of the overwhelming majority of the people in the world. And we can see the third world struggles becoming more and more successful. Now BRICS is exploding, like in terms of membership and in terms of intercommerce, so that they don't end up doing what's called unequal exchange, like Samir Amin, the Egyptian economist, was writing about. Now we're talking about, developing socialism on the basis of socialist principles, not exploitation. So I invite each of you to introduce yourselves as well now. And we have a special guest today, who's Ahmad, who I know for 20, 30 years, since 1980 or 1979.
Try 40 years.
40 years, okay.
1982.
Great. Okay, you once explained to me, like how the Zionists ripped off the Palestinians, in terms of the land. And it was utterly amazing to me to hear all the different levels at which, land has been stolen from the Palestinians, like about 5 different, categories of land. I wonder if you could explain this to the general public for us.
Well, my name is Ahmad. I'm Palestinian from Palestine. I live in Canada right now. And the method, the Zionist state or the pre-Zionist state, who in collaboration with the British prior 1948 worked, they continue doing until now. So it's the same method. The land in Palestine, it was made of different category. First category is the so-called state-owned land, which was the British, the British inherited, quote unquote, from the Ottoman occupation. And that was a good bulk of the land. From this ownership, they passed this ownership to the Zionist organization. It's called the Keren Kemet, or the Land of Israel administration. So that's one way of stealing the land. There's a second category which called it's Masha' land, which is a land belong to a group of villages, which is like grazed land for the village or the few villages. It's primarily owned by those villages, but it's not specifically to one person. It's kind of communal land for those villages. So those lands, the British used to come, and now the Zionists put their hand on it, say, we gotta use this for common use, for the common good use. So after a few months, few years, then this land will be transferred to the Zionist organization. Same thing, what's going on now on the West Bank. The same method. Actually, the Zionists on the West Bank since 1967 have been using the same British rule or laws. It's called the emergency laws, which is exactly the same rules the British used to use against the Palestinians pre-1948. So these big parcels of land will eventually, like to the Zionist settlement or outpost or a military outpost. Or sometimes they put their hand on those lands and say, this is for the green area. We're going to have it a greenery or a natural reserve. But to learn later, this land, it become a land belonged to a Zionist settlement. This is one thing. There's another parcels of land, which called the family communal land. It's a big land of piece of land inherited by one family. Let's say my clan owns let's say 20 or 30 or 40 acres of land. It's my clan, which is not specifically to one person. So this big parcel of land, the Zionists and the British use the same thing, the same method. We got to use this for the common good, or a greenery, or natural reserve, etc. And to learn later on, this has been slowly but surely moved to the colonists, the European colonists who comes to Palestine. Then, then there's the private land, privately owned land, which is basically it's owned by a person who has his or her own deed to that piece of land. Usually what they do is usually most of those lands are adjacent to the other three parcels of land. So they said, well, because this land is adjacent to will be publicly owned for the common good land, we have to confiscate it. And we're willing to give you some money for it. Of course, the Palestinians refuse to take money for that. So they usually they issue what do you call it, a military order to confiscate that land, and that land become eventually to the part of that parts of land, which eventually turned to a settlement or outpost or military base. That's how it works. How they've been doing it, and of course, there's other methods they use by the real estate agents who are collaborating with Israelis, especially in Jerusalem, in the old city of Jerusalem, or around the Palestinian land of Jerusalem, which is a Palestinian collaborator. He comes to me and he said, oh, I see you have a parcel of land or that house or that apartment. Would you like to sell it? And I have good buyer. And who's your buyer? Oh, no, is this so-and-so, a Palestinian guy or something, So it happened. Some people, yeah, well, I'll give it to you, and he will eventually buy it off you, that real estate agent who is actually collaborator. Then he in turn passed along to the settlers. So these are the 5 methods the Zionists have been doing since 1917. Okay, of the Palestinian land. I have, mind you, the first 2 big parcels, the 2 methods or 2 parcels of land are the biggest parcels of land in Palestine.
Yes, in 1917, it was General Allenby who walked into Jerusalem and proclaimed that this was the last crusade, as if, it was a permanent crusade. And exactly. That means the Zionists are crusaders.
That's true. They are by all means, they are crusaders. When it comes to economically and colonization, they are part of that bigger scheme of crusades.
Yeah, otherwise known as Western imperialism. Yeah, it's a collective. Yeah. There's another sort of area of land confiscation. I did an interview with a Palestinian man whose name was Jafar in Jerusalem one time, in which, his home in an area called Sheikh Jarrah. I don't know the pronunciation.
Sheikh Jarrah.
Sheikh Jarrah, yes. And he was living in there since 1967. because, and it previously, and because he was a refugee himself, from the area.
1948, not 67. They usually 1967. 1948.
48.
Yeah.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah.
I think he was living, even longer than 67. He was living in this house. And he was a refugee from Lod. And his home and lands were confiscated to make the airport area. Okay, so he went to the court, even to the Supreme Court, and said, this is my land. And the court said, well, if we give you back this land, we'll have to give back all the lands that were stolen from the Palestinians, and we can't do that. That would be the end of the state. Therefore, you cannot receive your lands back. This is the logic of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, that the Netanyahu thinks is too progressive.
No. When it comes to major issues for colonization of the Palestinian lands and the major crimes against the Palestinian people, the Supreme Court always have its rubber stamp to these crimes. Sometimes they do little token things that, make it's like putting some cosmetics to the Zionist ugly image of crime. Say, oh, look at us, we returned this parts of land to so and so. You see, so even this token of cosmetism by this Supreme Court land is not good enough for Netanyahu. He has to kill all that.
Yeah, he has to have complete control. Oh, okay. He calls it a democratic dictatorship. Well, but Jafar, he was living in this house that had previously been lived in by a Jewish Palestinian, who fled during the war to what became 48, the 48 territories of Palestine. So the courts, say that the land and the house, has to be returned to a Jewish owner. But when it comes to his land and his house, it's not being returned. So he's evicted from this house that he's been living in since 48. And where's he supposed to go? He can't go back to his own, and this is another way in which land is confiscated from the Palestinians. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's it's bring me back to the squatters, the colonist squatters inside Al-Khalil, which is called Hebron, which they claim that these properties inside the old city of Al-Khalil, which is called Hebron, it belonged to Jews. But those Jews who were there, their offsprings who live now in so-called Tel Aviv and everywhere else, they actually wrote a letter to the Supreme Court of Israel, said, we are the rightful owners of this land, these places, and we don't want them. These belong to the Palestinians. Whereas the white colonists, who came from all European white colonists mostly, said, oh, because we are Jews, they were Jews, therefore it's ours. So this is another exactly the same logic of illogic, I call it. So the rightful owners, they said, we don't want this properties because we got other properties. And those people who took over these properties inside Hebron, Al-Khalil, they don't represent us. They have no linkage, no lineage to us.
Wow.
Works for the Zionists.
Wow. I've never heard that before,
Yes.
This is not, revealed, in any sort of the reports about what's going on in Hebron. They never talk about this.
Of course not. Of course not.
We should get copies of the letter and reproduce them, and make it
absolutely. I still remember. Actually, to be honest with you, it was published. Not the letter. Actually, there was an article by Amir Haas.
Oh yes.
Of Haaretz, mentioning that. I don't know. It's her or Gideon Levy. One of them, either her or Gideon Levy, who mentioned that thing. It's easily we can retrace this information and publish it.
Yes. Okay. Now that's one struggle, Palestine. In the struggle in Africa, Steve, I just saw an announcement today that the the Western alliance of African states that are aligned with the United States are planning to attack Niger. And they've proclaimed a D-Day or something like that. But what do you think is going to happen there? Is your microphone is on mute, Steve. So can you give us a... Yes.
Yes. Well, I don't really know what's going to happen. This has been a very confusing situation in the sense of the military plans for the members of ECOWAS. I'm not sure if all of ECOWAS is supporting this. The AU, the African Union, does not support it. And I think that's a critical feature to consider. The African Union, whether I like it or not, is like the United Nations or like the EU of Europe. And when the EU gives a stamp on something, most nations of Europe are going to go along with it. The African Union, however, does not appear to have that power or that force over ECOWAS, which is I now see as a rival organization. That's how I see it now. Because they have no authority. See, here's the problem. As you know, Nigeria has cut the electricity to Niger. So I researched something this week about how can Nigeria do this? Yes, it's apparently the electricity is connected to its grid, so they can just cut it off. But on what legal basis? And there is none. These sanctions, these D-Days, these documents, these proclamations have no legal basis on any treaty, any agreement, nothing. They simply become judge, jury, and enforcer. So the way I see it, my analysis is that France and potentially the United States have, if this is true, have given Nigeria their tacit approval to do this. Because Nigeria and ECOWAS on its own have no right to enter a country, even though they've done it in the past. I think the entire existence of ECOWAS now needs to be challenged. But that is not coming from, at least I want to see that coming from African workers and intellectuals and people in the fields and governments. We will just have to see what occurs. And I don't like to have that as my view. We'll have to wait and see. If they said they're going to invade, I'm going to believe them. If they don't, then we'll see what else they do. That's how I see it. Mm-hmm. Again, another issue is any kind of military incursion into Niger helps the Islamists, because the Islamists are fighting the Nigerian government. So therefore, the Nigerian government has to fight now two enemies at one time. And that's kind of hard to do unless your army is ready for that. Right now, they're only fighting one, which is the Islamists. So what I'm hoping is that if this is going to occur, right now, my view is, as an outsider, I'm not a military strategist, that Mali and Burkina Faso's army should be in Nigerian territory now. They should be in their territory now, not waiting for any invasion, and hopefully they are. And they may have to take up, all three armies are going to have to figure out how they're going to fight the rebels, the so-called rebels, or the Islamists, and the attempted occupiers from Nigeria and ECOWAS. That's my view of the situation. With no electricity, I don't understand why this has not become an international crime outrage. Because when you talk about electricity, you turn off hospitals, turn off refrigeration, you turn off all kind of materials that people need for life. So that in itself is a crime against humanity, and a crime, actually a war crime, and an act of war. So we'll just have to see. I mean, what I had heard was that there was unrest in Nigeria weeks ago behind their attempt to their call for an invasion. I don't know if the Nigerian labor movement and political parties are prepared to strike and attempt to overturn their government at this point. I don't know where the demonstrations are around the world. This has not been handled well by the so-called, to me, by the international community, be the international community of leftists, of progressive, of activists. I've seen very little active opposition, and this is quite disappointing. However, it is what it is. So let's just hope that those of us who are staying on the forward side of history will condemn any plans for and any actual military occupation, because it just serves the interests of French and U.S. imperialism, as well as we must now begin to see Nigeria and ECOWAS as a pro-imperialist force. We must see it that way, even if they don't carry out the threat. The fact that they are calling for it means that they support the domination of the region by foreign imperialists and capitalists, because that's the only reason to invade the country, is that the current rulers don't meet the approval of the French and the United States. This is the only reason, because you can negotiate political relationships with the current government. Anything can be negotiated if you just want to give it time. Russia and Ukraine, NATO is fighting Russia in a proxy war, yet there are negotiations going on. Yes, there are. It's behind the scenes. There's no reporting on them. There are negotiations right now going on. So anything can be negotiated if the parties want to negotiate. And as I understand it, the Committee for the Salvation of the Fatherland has indicated its willingness to negotiate. It has called for the removal of sanctions as a condition. I see nothing wrong with that, but that also can be negotiated. So it just seems to me that somebody wants war, somebody wants bloodshed, somebody wants violence. That's not the people of Niger. They have not called for that. That's been called for by the imperialists, France, United States, and their front men, which is ECOWAS and Nigeria. That's the way I see it right now.
In terms of strategy, I think there's a big strategic difference between a reformist and a revolutionary approach, how to solve these problems. In the case of Palestine, for instance, I find that both the two-state solution proposed, by the United Nations and by United States, supposedly, even Canada, proposed, the solution of a two-state solution. Then there's, the progressive forces that are calling for a one-state solution, which are basically populated by ex-CP Communist Party members, who nonetheless, as far as I'm concerned, have a reformist approach to this, to the liberation of Palestinians and Palestine, because they ignore the Palestinian refugees. All of a sudden, they've disappeared. This is what a reformist, approach does. It accepts the existing conditions of life and attempts to better it under the existing domination of the powers that be, in order to achieve a certain degree of popular support, that is, support for their organization. So it's not really a liberation strategy that is being proposed in either case. It is rather a strategy to gain support for their particular party or movement. And this I reject. The right of return of the Palestinian refugees is the starting point, not an end point. Because if it's not the starting point, it'll never be an end point. In a two-state solution, Israel would not allow an independent, supposedly independent Palestine to bring back the Palestinian refugees, because they would insist upon maintaining control over the border with Jordan. And they have control of the border with Syria, and plus a piece of Syria. And, you know, the rest is controlled, you know, by the airport. So how are the Palestinian refugees supposed to be able to come back, even to a supposedly independent Palestine? Wouldn't work. A one-state solution, what does that mean? They say, oh, it's equality, you know, liberal, you know, democracy, in which each resident, you know, would have a vote. Okay, now the Israeli residents, who are about equal to the Palestinian residents, you know, have all the political power, have the economic power, have the military power, and they're not going to give it up. You know, who's going to make them give it up? You know, not the Palestinians. They won't have, you know, a countervailing power sufficient to do so. So they're not going to allow for the Palestinian refugees to return, even in the one-state solution. So that doesn't work either. You know, those are reformist propositions that I reject.
Even if, let's say, there is such thing called two-state solution, the Zionist state made it on the ground impossible to implement such a two-state solution, whereas the West Bank is inundated or dotted by over 240 settlements and outposts, okay, all across the West Bank, plus the bypass roads, etc., controlling over 60% of the West Bank on it, including East Jerusalem, which is in the heart of the West Bank. There's over 850,000 colony squatters on it. So even if, let's say, okay, the world wants to have that two-state solution on the West Bank from side and Gaza Strip from the other side, it's not gonna work. It's not gonna happen. It's like it's a fantasy. It become the Zionist consecutive Israeli government made such proposal a fantasy. So they just give us a lip service. Oh, we want to have a two-state solution. It's not going to happen. One-state solution is not going to happen. There's a big loss. Most of the Zionists reject such equality, such one-state solution, even if we want to go with that. So the whole thing is just only it's a charade. It's a facade of an actual persisting issue. We have a colonist, Western style, a squatter state has to go. No matter what, it has to go. There's no solution. It's the same thing as we talking about we had with Rhodesia, South Africa. Same thing. The system has to be dismantled and thrown in the garbage to start all over again. You cannot. And I agree with you. There will be no peace. There will be no any solution without the starting point. Rehabilitation of Palestinian refugees back to their land, homes, and fields. But back to what to the Niger issue. I quit. This morning I was reading that Burkina Faso and Mali put their air force in to support and be ready to support any to support and protect Niger from any attack. So that's what I don't know how serious is that, but this is what I read. It was on Russia Today. Sorry.
Very good. The same thing with respect to the Black struggle in the United States. It seems to me, you know, that the difference between a reformist and a revolutionary strategy is that the reformists are promoting assimilation, basically integration, they call it, you know, but it's really assimilation, in which you're supposed to, you know, lose your Black identity and be, you know, like colorblind. You know, Reagan talked about being colorblind, you know, because everybody's supposed to.
I call it the Oreo syndrome. Be Black from the outside and be white from the inside. I call it the Oreo syndrome.
Yes, the Oreo syndrome. Yeah. So, you know, like integration, yeah, for sure, yeah. But, you know, as what? You know, as the poorest paid worker in the whole system, you know, as the lower class of the working class, you know, as a lumpen proletariat, you know, this is what they're offering as integration. Yeah. And
and there is no solution to end the lower class status within the integration.
yeah,
That's why it's fake.
yeah.
In the same, but look at the native people.
Mm.
There is no integration for the native people. No, there is not. Well, you can have control over some land. Let's look at the Navajo Nation.
Mm.
Navajo Nation is between, I want to say, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, and there's no water on the rest. There's no. It's just like it's okay. It's very similar to Palestinians.
Mm.
There is no solution that is a reformist solution that enables the rights of the oppressed to regain their initial status as human beings deserving of political, economic, social, and cultural uh, integrity. I've been thinking about this recently. To me, the only real liberation of the United States, I mean, and a proposal could be the native nations are now the rulers of the United States. The native nations now running the United States Congress doesn't exist. The Senate doesn't exist. The native nations, in alliance with the black nation, run the United States. They are now the rulers. Why? Because of history. The only way to make it equal is for those who were on whose basis the land was stolen and built are now the rulers. Of course, that's not going to happen either, like my brother was saying in Palestine. That's not going to happen because basically the United States government would never have it. And unfortunately, many whites would never accept that. What? A black man is in charge of me because of what happened to him and her and slavery and Jim Crow. What? An Indian is in charge of me because we stole their land? But it would have to have some kind of radical redistribution of power. And that's why the integration approach doesn't work. There's no right. You are just a part of the system now. And because you are black, even if you are Oprah Winfrey, even if you are Barack Obama, even if you are a high very wealthy and high appraising, high status African American, there are no native people who are even equal to that status. It's just the tribal governments. I'm trying to show you how unequal it is even between African American natives and the overall white society. So all of these integration proposals are dead on arrival when it comes to real power and integrity and a solution towards liberation. They just don't work. Mm. And that's why I'm very happy to have Ahmad on the program because he's showing a mirrored situation in Palestine. This is why it's a good conversation. And that's why I say to African Americans, we have to see Palestinians not only as our allies, but as someone we can learn from historically. Because the occupation of Palestine, to me, is the same as the occupation of North America. Mm. There may be some historical differences, but it's the same concept. We want the land. Whoever's there has just got to go. Oh, you won't leave. We can't kill you. Well, let's just do something with you. I don't know. We'll give you whatever. I think it's very similar. That's why I'm very honored to have this conversation with him. So we need this alliance of a sharing, studying each other's history, studying each other's political orientation, studying each other's defeats, studying each other's ideas for liberation. I think that we can learn from each other. We have to do this. We have to, because no other struggle on the planet that's so similar. They're so similar. And the money goes from the United States to Israel. That shows you that they're similar. Anywhere the United States spends its money to keep somebody oppressed, those oppressed people should learn from each other.
Yeah. Well, it's a long, hard struggle.
Yes.
But, it is. It has to be. Any struggle has to address two things, in my opinion: social, economical issues to the oppressed people, and their cultural independence. If these two are not met, there will be no solution. It will be just only cosmetics
Right.
and just a game of charade and game of just wasting time, like the reformist ideology, which is actually it's an ideology make feel good ideology, but basically it doesn't lift the black nation or anybody oppressed in the world from where they are at. It's just a waste of time. And I agree with you. It has to be a real social, economical, and cultural independence in order to achieve independence.
Right.
We don't have much time left, actually. But I think in general, we can see that when the third world says no, and when the fourth world nationalities, within the first world say no, then the first world will fall. They're entirely dependent upon the exploitation of the rest of the world. And if they can't get away with it, then they're going to come apart because they don't have anything on their own, to sustain themselves, because they're an exploitative capitalist system which can only exist on the misery of others. And when the others, say no, then that's the end of the game. Okay, so I think that we've come to the end of our time for this week, and we should do this. We should continue on this basis, in the following week. So
thank you.
Okay,
yes,
good.
So we will see you all again in the next week's dissemination. What do we call this? What is this broadcast? We were broadcasting to the world. Yes. So until next week.
Conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, and Monday I'll have news of what my court case is doing. From the Monday first hearing. I'll report on that next week.
Good luck with that.
See you then.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.